Hello and welcome to day 2 of our Festival of Ideas. As we said, this is not a regular conclave. Here we actually have a conversation, we have no fights, we discuss and debate ideas. And what better topic to have than the idea of India? So joining me on the panel are people we've read, we've heard their views, we've read their books, but today we're going to be hearing them in person. Vinayji, the idea of India is something that has become also very political, aajkal. There is an old idea of India was supposed to be very secular, very liberal. Now liberal has suddenly become a bad word. What exactly is the definition of liberal? What is the idea of India that we are living in today that you see?
Well, I don't think there is any basic difference of opinion about the core of the whole thing. Only thing is that it is a matter of interpretation. And many times politicians interpret it the way it is more convenient to them. But otherwise, generally speaking, I don't know, I mean, there could be a spectrum of perceptions that is very acceptable. But generally speaking, I don't think there is a huge difference of opinion. There are certain aberrations, there are certain abuses in a way. But generally speaking, I don't think there is any big difference of opinion. There cannot be, rather. And let me add as well here that while there could be many ideas of India, or there could be many interpretations, but although we are a democracy, democracy doesn't mean anything to anybody. There has to be certain core about which we all need to be agreeing to. And in that context, I believe the idea of India is common. Idea of India is something which is indivisible that way. And we should look at it from that perspective. That would be my very humble submission.
Pawan, your take on this. Everybody's idea of India is more or less the same, except for, as Vinayji says, if the core is the same, then we are okay.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you for inviting me.
Always good to have you.
For this discussion, which is a very relevant one. I don't think, first of all, that everybody's idea of India is the same. We are all committed to India. But ideas can and should vary. There are 2 or 3 things that I want to mention here. The first is that there are 2 different theories. One theory perpetuated by the British as colonizers was that essentially there was nothing called India until they came. John Strachey famously or infamously said that there is no India, there is no idea of India, there is no concept of a geographical entity called India, and it was the British who created what we know as India through an administrative organization. This theory has been frankly junked, because India is a civilizational unity that goes back to the dawn of time. It doesn't need to be further proved, but the fact of the matter is that a common set of people growing in a defined geographical crucible, which the Puranas and some of our texts almost accurately identify, that has existed in continuity before the British, before Islamic rule, during Islamic invasion, while the British was here, and even now. So one idea of India is that it is a nation, but it is also a civilization. By a nation, I mean that after all, nation states were created only in the 17th century by the Westphalia Treaty. Before that, you had cultural unities, and India was always a cultural unity. So, India is a modern nation. That's one idea of India, is a modern nation which also is one of the most ancient identifiable civilizations in the world. Secondly, and if you want, I can continue or come in later.
Okay, I'll just get Vikram in, then I will bring you back. Vikram, broadly, of course, Pavan has this thing, but there is, if to the uninitiated or something, there is a black and white also. The BJP has one idea of India, the Congress has one idea of India. They will espouse certain people and certain leaders. We are suddenly seeing people who have been ignored, like Savarkar, and a lot of people that your book is also titled that, leaders of Bharat who've been ignored for a long time. So that also propagates a certain idea.
Thank you, Priya, and a great pleasure and honor to be amidst such stalwarts, Vinayji, Pavanji, and Dr. Anderson, and several others. I think in my opening remarks, I would like to say that, first of all, in India, there can be nothing that is unitary. So there is no the idea of India. There has to be several ideas of India. And everything in our country is in terms of multiplicity, whether it is our beliefs, our languages, our dialects, our cuisines, our costumes, everything is multiple. So how can there be one, the idea of India? And politically, there may be many ideas. Culturally, too, there can be many ideas. I think the biggest clash that we see today, Priya, is the fact that there has been, particularly after independence, Pavanji spoke of British colonialism, but after independence, there's been what is called as the Nehruvian consensus, which kind of imposed one singular idea of India on everybody, and everybody who did not fall within that rubric. Professor Anderson spoke about the RSS and how the RSS was victimized during the Nehruvian era. We know that very well. So anybody who did not conform to that idea that Nehru and his acolytes spoke about, they somehow were not part of the larger paradigm of India. And that is the contestation today, what Pavanji also alluded to, whether we are just a nation, state, which is defined by borders, territory, a constitution, or it's a civilization which predates the constitution. India was not born in 1947 or in 1950. The constitution gives us a set of rules to play the game. It is a very important document, but that cannot be the only defining marker of a civilization, the only pre-Bronze Age era civilization that is still surviving. The constitution has drawn from civilizational ideas rather than the other way around. And that is what was the constant tussle with the Nehruvians versus what I would call the nationalists, who would say that, the constitution is important, but there's something far more important than that. For Nehru, I think we've spoken this earlier, and I use Nehru as a euphemism for the larger, clash that is happening today, and not the individual per se. A living tradition was not important. He was happy even with the Somnath, maybe Somnath temple being taken over by the ASI and maybe made into a museum, but not as a living temple. The past had to be seen in a fossilized manner, and a rupture from the past, a rupture from traditions was what was the Nehruvian idea of India, which today even young people are contesting, and that is what we see manifesting in various clashes, socially, politically, culturally, and academically also.
And even on this platform, I can see Pavan itching to react, but let me get Vinayji over here. Vinayji, past, the Nehruvian idea is something, we're saying there is a civilization conflict, it's, but it is also confined within the borders of India. There are two ideas of civilization, idea of India, but something that is coming up very much in the narrative of the day.
If you could repeat the question.
My question is, the Nehruvian idea of India is something that is being questioned now. Why?
Well, because it was, I think, based on some erroneous kind of perceptions or maybe premises, if I may say that. For example, there are many people who contest the term that we use generally, which is cultural nationalism. And what Pavanji said, that we are a civilizational nation, not just a geographical nation. And there comes the difference of opinion. Our boundaries do not define our national character. It goes much, much more beyond, because history is a witness to that, whether it is Gandhara or any other thing for that matter, or the influence of our epics for that matter, which transcends our geographical borders. So we are a cultural nation, and therefore we believe in cultural nationalism, and there is nothing wrong about it. To a certain extent, see, unfortunately, what happened is amongst the Nehruvians, there is some kind of a unnecessary sense of being apologetic about this cultural contest. And culture also has to do something about spirituality. Had that not been the reason, Nehru would not have desired that after his death, the ashes should be immersed in Ganga, in various parts of Ganga for that matter. So I believe unnecessarily there is some sense of being apologetic. I mean, people are a little shy about their cultural or spiritual identity, which is not required. And that is what we are very boldly and unhesitatingly putting forth. That's it.
Pawan, you want to comment on this?
You know, Jawaharlal Nehru is very much, many decades after his death, more in the news for the wrong reasons than the right ones. The fact of the matter is that his contribution to the making of India in accordance with the principles of the Constitution, which reflected the principles and foundations of our ancient civilizational heritage, are frankly not only laudable but almost unparalleled. But like with every individual, he had, for his time, certain notions about modernity. He saw modernity largely in Western terms. And as Vikram mentioned, and as I have written in my book, The Great Hindu Civilization, a rupture from the past. Nehru believed, like a lot of the anglicized elite did, that the past largely consisted of ritual, superstition, prejudice. And India must, as he wrote himself in his book, break the shackles of the past and move on to the scientific temper that is there in the West. I think here his notion of what India is lacked the perception that India as a civilization and as a young nation cannot move towards the future by obliterating its past. And therefore, that past has to be taken on board. And even something like secularism cannot be defined as the negation of religion, but as the acceptance of the fundamental principle which is the foundational and cardinal belief of Hinduism, of respect for all faiths. You know, that I think is the second idea of India. Hinduism, which was by far and for millennia the foundation of this ancient civilization. I don't say this because I'm xenophobic, because that are the facts of history. And history has been predated now by at least 3,000 years due to, you know, the river Saraswati and the Rig Veda. But the truth is that Hinduism's foundational principles were never exclusionist. They were always inclusive. And I want to, if you give me 2 minutes, elaborate on it. And Vikram and I have discussed this often. I mean, there is a broad vision in Hinduism of not being doctrinaire. The Mahavakyas of Hinduism, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. Now this is said 5,000 years ago, when most people at that time believed that what we believe in is the only right thing and everything else is wrong. Hinduism had the courage, the audacity, the profundity of thought to say, Ekam Sat, the truth is one, wise people call it by different names. It was Hinduism's Mahavakya. And when I entered parliament, the first thing I saw was outside at the main gate, Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. Again said 5,000 years ago, when people believed that only our world is the world that matters, here were Hindus saying the entire world is our family. Or a third Mahavakya, Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. It's a remarkable insight. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. So Hinduism is an inclusive religion, and that is why in Hinduism there is not one system of philosophy. There are 6 systems of Hindu philosophy. There is also the Charvak school, which says that the Vedas are a bunch of lies, and it is part of Hinduism. There is the Tantra school, which has esoteric practices different from mainstream Hinduism, and it is Hinduism. No one has been burnt on the stake in Hinduism in its entire history for blasphemy. Because Hinduism is not, unlike other faiths for whom I have great respect, like the Abrahamic faiths, it is not an exclusionist faith. And that is reflected, it must be reflected in the idea of India as a nation as well. When Vikram said that India is a land of diversities, I fully agree with him. But where I slightly disagree with him, actually we rarely disagree, is that underlying that diversity, which is so apparent, for instance, to an outsider, dress, food, cuisine, topography, name it. But underlying that diversity is the unity of a civilizational consciousness of who an Indian is. And that will never go. And a last example, when from Amritsar someone comes to Chandigarh, in Chandigarh is called an Amritsari. When the same person from Chandigarh goes to Delhi, he is called a Punjabi. But when the same person goes abroad, he is called an Indian. That sense of unity underlying that diversity must be the idea of India.
Well said, Pawan. Vinayji, you wanted to come in, or I'll get Vikram?
No. I mean, I just wanted to flag. I mean, I'm really happy to listen to Pawanji, always very thought-provoking. But one idea which I believe we cannot ignore, one particular aspect of this discourse is that while we all say Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, but it will become a part of our mainstream discourse only when everybody accepts that. If somebody say my way or highway, if some people say that you are valid, they are invalid, then there is a problem. So therefore, if we are ready to kind of convince, in the sense, if we are successful in convincing everybody that Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti is the cornerstone of the idea of India, I am sure there should not be any quarrel around that. But unfortunately, that is not happening, which is why people who have faith-based quotas in their parliament also try to teach us secularism. That is the irony of the whole thing. And therefore, we should be steadfastly, courageously, in a very determined manner, talk about this Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. And I am sure all belief systems will have to agree to this if we really believe in what we call as harmonious collective life of the humanity.
Okay.
I think Vinayji stole my words, which I've usually used to counter Pawanji in the few areas that we disagree, as he mentioned, that, all these high virtues are good, and that's the ideal to achieve. But as Vinayji said, it has to be conformed to everybody in the club. Even today in India, we have faiths which do talk about this exclusivity. So when we talk and demonize Hindutva also, that this is something very exclusionary, and it is a departure from what Hinduism is, the usual difference between Hinduism versus Hindutva, which a lot of Pawanji's friends try to create this false equivalence. I think that is totally unfair and uncalled for, because when a faith as evolved as Sanatan Dharma, there was no Hinduism at that time, actually comes in a clash, a civilizational clash with other faiths, the Abrahamic faiths, which do not believe in this, many roads to the same truth, then what does the other faith do? It has to also stand up. You can't fight someone only on the strength of your philosophical, virtues and all these high principles. There has to be a kshatriya spirit. There has to be a warrior spirit, and that is exactly what Hindutva does. Even in Savarkar's own writings, you see that he says, we are not going to be the ones who will proactively attack someone, but organizing yourself to counter somebody's predatory moves, that is a very legitimate and justified attempt for any group of people. And why Savarkar, even someone like Sri Aurobindo had said in 1923 that, the Hindu-Muslim problem will be solved once the Hindus organize themselves, and not the Gandhian way of how a bridge needed to be built between the two communities. So I think this larger discourse on secularism and that being the idea of India, I think we need to underline and also give credit for the fact that India is secular because the majority here is the Hindu community. It's not a surprise that from Israel to Korea, other than India, there are no other democracies. Why is it that there are no Muslim countries which are a democracy, and why is it only India? Why is that credit not ever given to a community for its tolerance? The albatross of secularism, the albatross of tolerance is always put on it. Even today in India, openly sartan se juda, slogans can happen, and that is really not countered in the manner even by the liberals and the moderates within a community or even outside. As I think Perry Anderson, the British historian, had said in his counter to Nehruvian secularism, he had said something very interesting, that wherever the grip of Hinduism stops, AFSPA begins. So we've seen that even in the Northeast. So I think that's a very real problem in a multi-religious, multi-faith country. And that is the problem with the perverse manner of secularism that we have pursued, where all the ills of other communities are to be tolerated, accepted, ignored, whether it's a uniform civil code, whether it is, which other country in the world which calls itself secular, but then for a Hindu man or woman, can marry only at 21, but a Muslim girl can be married off at 13 the minute she attains puberty, because they follow Fatwa-i Alamgari and we have to follow the Indian Penal Code and the rules here. Which other majority community cannot run its own institutions, its own educational institutions, its places of worship are controlled by the government. All the money that we as devotees go and give in a temple goes to the government coffers to build some highways and roads, whereas everything under, including the Delhi High Court is probably on Waqf property. So I think these anomalies that have come have distorted this idea of India and made it what I think the BJP and its affiliates call pseudo-secularism. And that is the angst which is constantly playing out in terms of clashes between these two very, important ideas of contestation.
Is the idea of India see secularism as an albatross?
No, I think there is a point in what Vikram is saying, that there are certain faiths which, in theory at least, believe that they alone have the monopoly to what is the way either to God, moksha, salvation or truth. It is true Hinduism is different. And it is true that there are many legitimate Hindu angsts which have built up even prior to 1947 and afterwards. I discussed them again in great detail in Great Hindu Civilization. The support for the Khilafat movement by Mahatma Gandhi, well-intentioned in order to keep all communities in the struggle for freedom against the British, was opposed within the Congress party itself, including by stalwarts like Dr. Ambedkar. That created a backlash, because why should India support a pan-Islamist movement? After 1947, the controversy of Somnath, where Panditji felt, again by his time, because historical hindsight is always not 2020, he felt that it was perhaps not in conformity with his notion of the state being above religions. But a lot of Hindus felt that a temple which had been pillaged over a dozen times, and now that India was independent, for its restoration by money raised by the public under a public committee with the backing of Mahatma Gandhi, there was no harm if Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the President of India, went to inaugurate it. And so on and so forth. The Shah Bano case, what Vikram mentioned, not having authority over our own institutions, the partial reform of the reform of Hindu personal law but not of other laws, and so on and so forth, leading up to the Ayodhya Ram Mandir. These are the angsts which are valid and which need to be dealt with, including what was there in the past, minority appeasement. But in doing so, do we make this very Hinduism, which as the reason which you accept has allowed the unity of India to become a mirror of exactly those faiths which we believe should be far more open and exclusive? So, Sartan se juda is to be condemned, and when in a Dharm Sansad there is a call publicly made by so-called spokesman of the religion that there should be a genocide of Muslims, why are we endangering the unity of this country by emulating those whom we have and will, through our conquering eclecticism, assimilate, and to a great extent have assimilated?
Okay.
Today India is a country of many faiths, living peacefully most of the time since 47 with aberration. Let us not destroy in India, where the minorities spread across the country are in such large numbers that you will have civil wars raging across the country, if you believe that they are to be exorcised.
Okay, I have to get Vinayji to have the last word on this. Is what Pawan saying correct? Is there such a threat? Is there any call for genocide of minority communities in the India that you are living in today?
I think there are always people with very extreme kind of ideas, and they are not the mainstream. These are aberrations, and nobody supports these kinds of extreme views. But the fact of the matter is that in a family, let's say, if there are two brothers, one is very accommodative, very tolerant, very assimilative kind of, he accepts the counter view as well, and the other one never does this. Either the first will have to change or the second will have to change. If the second change, the first also tries to emulate him, which is wrong. But yes, it happens. It's a natural kind of a corollary of the thought process that unfortunately was shaped for several decades post-independence. And we were given to understand that being a Hindu is something which is our crime, which is our sin. Even the term Hindu was not being considered as something. I mean, people used to say, oh, this term came from somebody else, and this is, I mean, what kind of things are we talking about? I mean, these are diversionary tactics. Let us face that we are all in this particular country, and our identity essentially is that of Indian, of which, as he rightly pointed out, we are Indians, and India is India because majority over here are Hindus. Let us accept that.
I think that is something we all agree on, that the idea of Hindu, no, Pawan does not.
I can't agree.
Okay, but we are out of time.
What we are very much because India is majority Hinduism, but India by definition is plural, multicultural, multi-religious entity. And if the two brothers...
The other name of it is Hindu.
The
other name of pluralism is being Hindu.
Okay. That is where we have begun to emulate those whom we criticize.
See, this is what I said, Priya, that giving acknowledgement where it is due is not done. You shy away from
Let us be broad-minded.
This is our strength. No.
Therefore, I have given perhaps in a 400-page book greatest tribute to Hinduism, which many Hindus are not aware of.
Yeah,
However, I want to say to end, if you like, this two brothers, either they can accommodate because the one that is more accommodating influences the other, or
They are not going to get influenced, unfortunately.
So if we give it up, we will have what is called a partition. And that is going to be a division of it.
Mr. Verma, I am not saying that we have to give up. I am trying to understand that let us gather some insight into the things that are happening and the thought processes that are taking
The
place.
partition, the second brother has already taken away 1/3 of the land mass. So I don't think there can be a second partition, Pavan.
And the two brothers we are left with are both Hindu bhai. So on that note.
Frankly, they are fairly good brothers, except for politicians.
Okay. And the
I'm
politician
saved
on the panel has had the last word. So thank you so much for this conversation, all of you.